You are listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Well, a happy Wednesday evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Scotty Roberts. You're joining me on my program, the Intrepid radio program, right here on Odyssey Radio Network. And you can hear the audio version that goes out to all the affiliates and the radio stations. That is at odysy1.com, and look for the Intrepid radio program. Also, you can join the simulcast video over on my YouTube live stream at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. That's me. And spelled Mr. all out, by the way. And while you're there, subscribe to my channel and like the video. That helps me out in the long run. Helps me keep doing what I'm doing here. So I want to thank you for being here. It's been a long day, and it's getting cold up here in the area of the country I live in. I'm in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, but out east, over across the Wisconsin border, and in rural Wisconsin in a nice small town there. About an hour, maybe 45 minutes from the heart of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. So I like it out here in the country. I've actually grown to hating the city. I hate when I have to drive into the city to go pick up certain art supplies for my business, or different appointments we have in the cities, or Cub Scouting things for the kids that are in the cities. It's just a pain in the ass, and I hate doing it. I've really grown tired of city traffic and dealing with that. Maybe that's a sign of my age, late middle age, early elderly. I'll be 59 years old in just about a month, not even, a couple of weeks. And so I'm in that pushing 60 category. But remember, all of you who are 30 and up, we're all old fogies to high school kids and college kids. Oh my God, you're 30? You're elderly. Did you have black and white television too when you were young, like my grandparents? I get that all the time. I was at a cheerleading rally thing for my little girls, my 4-year-old pre-K girl and my 7 going on 8-year-old first grader. I get them mixed up sometimes. They are in little kids cheer class, and they had a big cheer thing for everything from the 4-year-olds all the way up to high school girls and kids, I should say. And I was there last Saturday with the family watching my 2 little girls do their little thing. And as we came to get tickets, there were 2 middle-aged ladies at the table, and I walked in with my 2 little girls, and my wife and my son were just behind me, and the woman at the desk said, "Oh, do you need tickets for you and your granddaughters?" And then my wife walked in behind me. I said, "I need tickets for all of us. Is it for me, my wife, my son, and my 2 little girls?" And I don't get too bristly about that. But maybe it's just an internal thing where I look in the mirror every day and I see my hair is not as dark as it used to be. It's more white than anything. My facial hair is pretty much all white. I'm starting to get the saggy face and stuff like that. That comes along with getting a little bit older. And, you're getting wrinkles and things hurt more. Stuff like that. I'm not complaining. It's just life. But I like to identify myself as the husband to my lovely, luscious, vivacious wife, who is 20 years younger than I am, pushing 40, which is, again, elderly to some kids below 20, and my little kids. They're not my grandkids. They're my children. I've got 6 of them all together. So, to say something about my background, for those of you who don't know, what do I bring to the table? What authority do I have to speak on any of these topics I speak of? Well, first of all, look at it as 40 years of study and research into some of these different areas, ranging from history to historical mysteries, to biblical mysteries, to Bible topics or theological topics, to the strange and the weird that coincide with all of these things. I put that under the category of mysteries. And I want to tell you a little bit about my background. Here's what I bring to the table. And I got to find a succinct, easy way to put this into a sentence I might utter at the beginning of my show. Hi, this is Scotty Roberts. You know what I bring to the table? I've had over 1 billion hours of research and study over the last 50 years. And I went to high school. Then I went on to a Bible college where I dropped out in my junior year. I was recruited almost immediately by a small seminary, theological seminary in the Twin Cities, and they said they would tutor me in the balance of my bachelor's degree while I started my master's program. And I went to seminary there for 2 years. I dropped out and went into advertising, where I spent the next 35 years of my life. In advertising as an illustrator, a designer, an art director, a creative director. So basically, what I bring to the table with letters behind my name is Scotty Roberts, high school graduate with probably a 2.8 grade average. I was not an applied student. I didn't apply my research until I was an adult, and I was doing it on my own. And so I've got a high school diploma. I never finished my bachelor's degree because I was a dropout, and I never finished my master's degree, nor the tutoring on my bachelor's degree, because I was a dropout and I went into something I loved much more, which was advertising. And so that's where I spent the most of my life. So that's what I bring to the table for you, my listeners. And there are people, I will say this, over the years, once my books started coming out, my first book was published in 2008, but that was an illustrated children's book. I'd say young readers' book because it's a little more involved. The biggest audience I had for that book was actually college age and up. But my first, if you will, non-fictional books that were more academic level, that would be with The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim, which came out in 2012. Followed the next year by The Secret History of the Reptilians, which, by the way, isn't as full of weirdness as you might think. It was subtitled, The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim was subtitled, I got them right here. You know what? Here you go. The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim, the untold story of fallen angels, giants on the earth, and their extraterrestrial origins. Now, I will say, that builds that up much more than what it actually was. Although I hit all those topics, that was the kind of fun part of the book that I explored and said, hey, here's some other explanations for these old Hebrew legends and mythologies. And the follow-up was The Secret History of the Reptilians. And I subtitled this, The Pervasive Presence of the Serpent in Human History, Religion, and Alien Mythos. And so those books, I started drawing after I did these two books, was when I started drawing my first criticisms out there. And those criticisms came, pardon me as I turn away from my mic to set those back on my shelf, those criticisms came in the form of, oh, you don't have any letters behind your name, you're not a historian, you have no degree, and because I always called myself a historian and a theologian. Well, a historian, if you look up the strict definition, it's one who studies and researches history. It doesn't say, oh, and also requires letters behind his name. The same with theology. I study and research theology. Now, while I spent 5 years of post-high school education working to get a couple of different degrees, I never finished those degrees. So does that invalidate my research? No, it just means I am a researcher who does not have letters behind my name. That doesn't mean you could put me head to head with somebody who has letters behind their name, and we could debate and we could discuss and all of that stuff. But I have found that it doesn't really matter. It only matters if you want to be accepted in certain circles, not if you are actually doing good research or not. So that's the criticism that I faced because I never finished my degrees. And I have not only faced criticism for that, but on the basis of that, people calling me a fraud, people, all of this stuff. And it's generally the same people who will criticize every TV show that comes out that smacks of pop cultural mysteries and things like that. So I got a lot of that kind of junk hurled at me. And at the same time, while they would not just criticize the fact I didn't have a degree, it went even into areas where they were digging into my personal life and trying to discredit me as an individual. You go and you pay X number of dollars to do research on somebody's credit, on somebody's arrest record or prison record or convictions or anything they can find about you. And yeah, I've been arrested a couple of times, but not for the kind of stuff Rocky Stucci does. You know, he was a tough guy. He was a wise guy. He was a mafioso biker. Me, I was just a guy. I was a guy in advertising who once in a while, not even once in a while, twice in 40 years got arrested for being pulled over and having unpaid traffic tickets. So there's my life of crime. But somebody would bring that up. Somebody once, in criticizing my books and my lack of a degree from an institution, criticized me by finding records in court records on my divorce back almost 20 years ago now, back in 2000 and 2001. And in that, my wife had filed a restraining order against me based on false charges. And somebody said, well, what about this stuff? And, yeah, you're such a stellar person. You're a great person, being sarcastic, while they're criticizing my books. And the only answers I would give, well, you obviously weren't there for the trial, and you weren't there for all the hearings, so you really have no idea of what happened. All I can say is the outcome was, of all of that, I got sole custody of my kids. And I was a sole custodial dad for almost 5 years before Rainey came into our lives, about 14 years ago. So there you go. That's my history. So trying to encapsulate all of that into one sentence that I can utter at the beginning of my show. I'm Scotty Roberts. I have no degree, but I got a hell of a lot of school time and research time over the years. So take that one and use that when thinking about what I bring to the table. And critics can blow me. There you go. Because they're there for one reason. They're there to criticize. They're not there to find out what kind of person you really are and what you bring to the table. They're there to find a way to criticize anything that comes across the table. And by the way, most of the sites where I drew my criticism were sites where everybody had an anonymous moniker, and you never knew who they actually were saying these things. And so that tells you a lot. I'm going to tell you something, folks, just as a side note, as I rabbit trail on this. If you're going to criticize somebody in social media, I mean in anything, politics, religion, theology, research, history, whatever it is, if you're going to hurl nasty insults at somebody, why don't you put your name to it? If you don't put your name to it, that to me puts on display your lack of the power of your own conviction in what you're saying. Your words mean something when you put your face to them. What am I going to do if you criticize me and call me an idiot? What am I going to do? Go bash out your headlights? Please. So I would highly recommend, and I don't criticize anybody without letting people know who I am and why I'm saying it. And then I'm always open for debate and for discussion and for finding a good middle ground. I never criticize somebody just solely on the basis of their particular belief system, be it politics or religion or whatever, but I will criticize when somebody comes and just throws out one-liners, calls you names, They capitalize, and I guess they call that trolling nowadays. Don't do it. Put your name to it. Show the power of what you believe by putting your name and your face to what you say. Words mean something. They mean even more when you take accountability and responsibility for what you say. Enough on that. That's not the topic for tonight. We're going to go back into what we've been talking about, which is the blending of paganism, the blending of it with Christianity or vice versa. Can you be a Christian in Western culture and abide by the tenets of the Christian faith and still find veracity in certain elements of paganism? Can they be blended together? One of the big things that people will bring up is that, well, Christianity focuses on a monotheistic God, one God. It focuses on what is called the Son of that God, or one member of their Trinity, and redemptive acts, and so on. The God-man who came to the earth, which, when you go over into, of course, paganism, you start looking at other God-men who existed prior to him, and how a lot of that information was extrapolated over. And then you get Christian apologists, as we talked about several times, who want to decry that as diabolical mimicry. Satan knew that the real Messiah, the real God-man, was coming and set up these false ones centuries ahead of time in order to throw people off and to get them to not accept the real God-man when he came. That's quite a conspiracy theory on a celestial level. And how do you prove that? You don't. It's all faith. It's all what you choose to believe. And so I've already gone through why I have chosen to talk about this, the things that led me to stray, if you will, or remove myself from Christianity. And really not being an atheist, but being an agnostic. Gnosticism, knowledge, knowing something, having knowledge of. Gnosticism, the prefix put into me, no knowledge, absent of knowledge. Meaning, when you say you're an agnostic, I say, I don't really know. I don't really know if this is true or that is true. And still, even when I look at paganism, I don't know if any of that's true either. All I know that's true is it's all spiritual efforts to try to create. Sometimes people create religion out of it. Other times, people just want to either know what they believe or feel good about what they believe. And I know in Christianity, many times what hit me was wanting to extricate myself from that because I did not like the negative aspects of Christianity, of how to live. I used to call it grocery shop, iron bar belief system. You have to believe this on this list, this grocery list, to do what's right in God's eyes, and these things on this grocery list were the things you didn't do, or you were out of touch with God and out of his will. I'm being a little flippant here, but the joke came up yesterday in the chat room last night about dancing. And we used to say, why do Baptists dance standing up? They dance standing up because, I'm sorry, I screwed that up. Why do, that's me in a punchline. How about that? Start over. Why do Baptists have sex standing up? Well, because they believe it'll lead to dancing. So, and even that didn't have the impact. I'm missing something on my punchline. I'm talking too fast, thinking too fast. I'm out ahead of my punchlines. Baptists dance or have sex standing up because they believe it'll lead to dancing. That's not right either. I'll get it right one of these days. Please criticize me heavily for screwing up my punchline. I don't have any degrees behind my name, so I don't have a degree that says I'm a comedian. So I obviously can't tell jokes. Well, that was another thing. When I had these critics talking to me, I'd say I'm an artist by trade. I said I never got an education in being an artist. I said I don't have any degrees or letters behind my name to be an artist or an illustrator or a designer. I said, yet that's what I've done for a living for 40 years. I said, I suppose I'm a fraudulent artist now because I have no degree. And of course, they found a reason to justify the one and not justify the other. So there you go. So let's move on. Horrendous fucking up of it. Oh, pardon me. Sorry about that, Ron. Radio station listeners. I don't know if that's going to be caught or not. And edited out. So, bleeped out. So, after screwing up a joke and giving you a bit of my history, let's move on with this. We left off last night talking about when it comes to your spirituality, you're stuck with being responsible for what you choose to believe. And based on your beliefs, how you choose to act in the world. Religion and our spirituality, which are two totally different things. Remember, spirituality is in the heart, if you will. Religion is an outward show. It's a ceremony. I religiously brush my teeth every day. Does that mean I do it thinking of God? No. It means it's a practice. So I want to talk about the nature of belief a little bit here. A discussion of either Christianity or of paganism is nothing if not a discussion of personally held belief systems. And to be drawn to the work of interspirituality is to be willing to grapple with issues of belief and still find a way forward. You can see all through this little series, we've grappled with, struggled with, worked with definitions, always throwing out caveats to make sure people understand what we're talking about. Always trying to make sure I'm not offending sensibilities, because that's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to discuss the overall topic, not tell anybody you're wrong, you're a sinner, you're going to hell, or you're wrong for this, wrong for that. I'm trying to find a way to move us forward in talking about this. And the blending of traditions is a deliberate mixing and balancing of belief and practice religion that reflects on an individual's personal history and experience of the divine. How many of you have experienced the divine? I was told when I became a born-again Christian back when I was 11 years old that I would experience God. I would experience the filling of the Holy Spirit. I know I had moments where I felt very inspired. But are those moments of actual experience of God? Same thing in paganism. Are you experiencing God? And by the way, just put in a note here. I'm using these two things, paganism and Christianity, to illustrate the point. You can plug in any religion or belief system you want. And on that, I got to go out for 2 minutes. So you sit tight. We'll be back right after this break. Hang on. Hey gang, welcome back from the break. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. And you might be, and if you're not, you could be, watching the video simulcast of this over on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Join the rest of the Intrepids in the chat room that's going live alongside the show, and express your points of view. Talk, get to meet other people. You bring the beer. So, let's pick up where we left off. I was talking about this whole thing about personal experience, personal history, and how you bring that in your experience with the divine. And I was asking you, have you had experience with the divine? What does that look like for you? If you're over in the chat room, go ahead and tell me about your experience with the divine. Share it with everybody else. How do you view that? Now, I've always heard people's stories about experiencing the divine, their brushes with God. And yet, all of those look to me to really be based in personal emotion, personal euphoria about what they believe. I haven't yet heard anybody give the story like Elijah the prophet, who it says, and God took him up into the mountain and put him in a cleft of the rock because he asked to see God. And God covered him, and it says, and God passed by him, but did not look in his face, lest he die. And Elijah only saw, it says, the back portions of God as he went by. He saw God's back and ass, in other words, in the clouds as he went by. Was he seeing pictures in clouds? Was he, and I'm serious about this, I'm not being flippant, was he using psychedelics? Were these things that prompted this vision he had? According to his story, it was a physical act that took place. And it says, and God passed by in the fire, and he was not there. And then he passed by in the whirlwind and the earthquake, and he was not there. But then there was the still small voice that spoke, and he knew that's where God was. And then you've got the account of Moses, who said, and we talked about this when I talked about my book, The Exodus Reality, how Moses, it says, he camped outside the camp while they were out in the wilderness after the Exodus. And it says, and God's Shekinah glory would settle on his tent, and God would enter Moses' tent where he would commune with Moses. And Moses said, and God talked to me face to face as a man talks to his friend. Yet 9 verses earlier in the same passage, Moses wrote, no man can see God's face and live. And yet he tells of his own experience just a few paragraphs later, how he sees God face to face and talks with him as a man talks to his friend. That's divine experience. But of course, what was Moses doing? I believe Moses, being raised in Egypt for the first 40 years of his life, absolutely immersed in Egyptian spirituality, and learned all about Eastern spirituality, Mesopotamian spirituality, Sinaitic spirituality, Ethiopian spirituality. Remember, in Egypt, the Pharaoh was a god among men. And I believe Moses, without getting into any of that story, was somebody who was given that divine appointment by the priests, by his position. He was a brother to the gods. So was this Moses and saying, I can see God face to face, but he's actually telling the people, I'm more than a man. He's falling back on Egyptian spirituality. I'm more than a man. I was a god in Egypt. And therefore I can see God and commune with him. Well, all that aside, what's your spiritual experience? What's your divine experience? Now, since belief is central to all this stuff we're talking about, it's going to be helpful to understand what I mean by that and what we think its characteristics are. We define a belief as an idea that you hold to be true, because a belief system contains a piece of how the world really is, how we see it, how we interact with it. That's to us. That's what we appropriate. It acts as a filter for my reality. I bristled the other day talking about how truth is in the eye of the beholder, and your personal, that's his personal truth. Well, I don't believe in that. I believe in, what I do believe in is a variation of that how I perceive things can color and establish my perception of truth. It doesn't change the innate nature of truth. My perception of something, let's say I'm colorblind and I see a white ashtray sitting on the table. Now let's change that color. I see a blue ashtray sitting on the table. When its real color is green, its true innate color by the light and prism. I perceive it as blue because of my color blindness. Does that change the innate color of the ashtray? No, it changes my perception of it. So therefore, that is what I'm going to see. And that's how I will, oh, that's green. Until I get a pair of those special glasses that show me that it's really, green is really blue, and blue is really green, and red is really whatever. So you get the idea with that illustration. The filters of your beliefs are so strong that they typically allow in only information that matches the filters. And it's going to screen out contradictory input. And a concept or an idea that doesn't match your filters will generally be ignored or rejected. Color blindness. Now, color blindness isn't a voluntary act. That's something that's haywire with your eyesight. But what do you do that colors your perception? What are the things that you allow in? The ideas you consciously choose as your beliefs, and also the ideas you unconsciously hold, will literally create everything about your world. If you believe you can't do certain things, you have the grocery list of being out of the will of God or the gods, then you're not going to do them. And when you do, you'll feel absolute guilt about it. Go to the confessor. Pray to your God. Ask for forgiveness. If you can't do those certain things. If you believe you can experience God in only one way, place, time, then you'll probably not experience God in any other way. In any other way, place, or time. You're only going to perceive God as you have set it in your mind and your belief system to perceive God and experience Him. And God in any other way, place, or time is going to be out of place for your belief system. Now, if you believe that the world must be a certain way, then you're going to try to build a different one. You're not going to try to build a different one. You're going to try to build your world around that certain way that you believe. And at the individual level, beliefs are interior, inside. They're subjective events that are not readily seen or measurable until an action or a behavior occurs that demonstrates the underlying belief. And at the level of culture, beliefs show themselves in a shared worldview. Fashions, assumptions, prejudices, social conventions, religious values on a cultural level. I would say, and this is not a criticism, but I would say, look at Islamic culture. Look how much their religion, their belief system colors everything they do in fashions, assumptions, prejudices, social conventions, religious values. The individual and the cultural realms come together to create the buildings, the institutions, the laws, the governments, the armies, charities, and the economics that give physical shape to shared internal belief systems. That's cultural. And not only do beliefs shape your reality, but with them, you shape society and the world. So if you believe something, and you cannot act any way different than what your belief system tells you, this is why you have the religious right in America. I don't like the religious right. I don't agree with everything they say. I certainly don't agree that there should be a theocracy. They believe that, however, because they believe this is what God wants them to do. So these strongly held religious beliefs are what governs the way they look at everything around us in our society and in our culture. And one feature of beliefs is that they tend to group together. You notice that? I can drive into Minneapolis today, and I can find a whole Muslim quarter of Minneapolis, which didn't exist when I was a young man in Minneapolis. It's only risen up in the last 10, 15 years. But you can go through whole neighborhoods. I look at the theater district over on the east of the downtown area of Minneapolis, close to the University of Minnesota campus. There's a huge Somali population there, therefore a huge Islamic population there. The theaters are still there, and you can go see the Theater in the Round, Hay City Stage, some of these other places are still there, icons of theater in the Minneapolis area. But the whole surrounding neighborhood has become very Islamic. So you find these groups sticking together. They reinforce each other to form a belief system or a structure. And within a belief structure, ideas are generally consistent with each other, with one concept building on another, and another, and another, and each acting to support the ones that follow. As an example, take a look at the structure formed by the political philosophy of the United States, which is based on a constitutional form of government, a Bill of Rights, and institutions built from them. This is where belief systems are discussed and incorporated to a great extent, well, almost to a sole extent, on those founding documents. A building provides a good visual example of how beliefs take physical form and build a structure. Whether the structure is visible or invisible, buildings also illustrate the constructed nature of beliefs. Beliefs, which they consist of ideas and concepts that people hold to be true. And these concepts may have come from observing nature or from scientific experiments, human relationships, political decisions, or survival needs. And or they just may have simply been inspired by spiritual experience. Vision, shamanic journey. I know a few of you have mentioned in the chat room having been on shamanic journeys. And I know some shamans as well. Or revelation. Do any of you feel you've had revelation from the divine in your spiritual life? Now, mostly people who have revelations will find themselves being outcasts amongst society, other people who don't have revelations, don't have visions. There's mockery. There's a brushing. Joe had a vision, right? You know the way it goes. Joe is a shaman. Oh, okay. I'll go to my doc. Thanks very much. So, whatever the source of the idea, it's still articulated by people who are put into a cultural context. And it's used to construct a pattern of values, which is the belief system. The United States has a belief system. And I'm not talking religion. It's a people who design concepts and group them together. They assign meanings and value to them. They rank them in importance, empower them politically, religiously, socially, and they choose to act or not act upon those things. And even entertaining the thought that beliefs and belief systems are human constructions, it's sometimes a difficult concept to grasp because the corollaries are not perfect. Foundation, going all the way up to the roof of a building, belief systems don't always work that way. Many of them come from backgrounds in which the nature and the source of belief is never overtly considered, and certain beliefs are never questioned. For many people, belief itself is sacred. I believe this. Don't touch it. I'll share that with you, but you can't change it. You can't change. It's sacred to me. And it can't be approached objectively. And to do so brings on great anxiety. We see it in politics nowadays. Consider Trump derangement syndrome, as it's been dubbed. Trump haters. You try to convince them otherwise with facts and figures. They don't want to hear it because their belief system has become a quote-unquote sacred thing to them. Same in religious belief. Belief systems become sacred. And when you challenge that with objectivity, you're going to bring on a lot of anger and anxiety from those people. You're challenging a belief system. As you'll see in Fowler's explanation of faith development, this is a normal aspect of spiritual growth. And I don't have Fowler's quote in front of me. I'll get to that. Sorry about that. I'm reading some of my notes here, and I don't have the actual quote here. So let's pass that one by. It's a normal aspect of spiritual development and spiritual growth. And so it's a perspective that shaped and informed many of the world's mainstream religions. And it's still very common today. Many people are raised to believe, we're inculcated into something, that and we're raised to believe that certain beliefs are absolutes. You can't question them. You can't go beyond the boundaries of that. It's an absolute. And they believe they have no power to examine their beliefs and the ideas that comprise them. And this is something I found in the church when I started questioning things and offering up alternative ideas. We can't even talk about that, people would tell me. That's blasphemy. That's heresy. And I'm like, do you really believe that? Do you really believe we shouldn't dialogue about questions about our faith? No, that's anathema. You can't do that. You can't question beliefs and ideas that comprise a belief system. They can't question their beliefs, challenge them, or insist that they might be useful, healthy, or productive for themselves and their society to do so. And so you run up into that brick wall. If the beliefs are not particularly helpful, many people believe that they're simply stuck with them. Many believe that they can't change, abandon, or reconstruct such beliefs. So in effect, they relinquish their responsibility, their power, their free will for holding on to certain beliefs to the system out of which they arise. And this is where I talk about the blending. Even the tendrils of the past and the past teachings that come up and grab you as you question, and you start to question your questioning. Those are coming from those innately held, those deeply held belief systems that we've been convinced are true. Even if we're now questioning them and we step away from them, we still get those coming up and grabbing us from the behind. So paganism asserts that you have the right to examine any idea or belief you wish. That's the nature of paganism. You might pick up any concept you choose and look at it from every angle. You can question it. You can examine it. You can put it to the test. You're not obligated to accept any idea as true until you experience it to be true yourself, personally, directly. What I found in Christianity is the opposite. There is not that ability to express free will of accepting new ideas. We already have those things. We're told even in the scripture, these things are written that you may know what you believe. End of story. And so Christianity presented itself in its earliest days as the answer to all the questions. And as it grew over the centuries, and now 2 millennia's worth, it became something that once you accept it and you are inculcated into it, that becomes the way it is, and there is no questioning. And so to talk to somebody about opening themselves up to other belief systems, is there a possibility that you could not be right about everything in your belief system, that there are other belief systems that you can blend in. Is personal experience, does that trump taught knowledge? So your personal experience is going to decide for you what you're going to believe, rather than what you're being told you need to believe. And so you have this right. You have this power to have freedom of choice. I know paganism offers that. Christianity does only up to the line, and after that line you can't question anything else. With the right comes the responsibility. And conversely, with the responsibility comes the freedom or the right. You can't blame others for your values or your choices. It's all on you. It's your responsibility for what you believe. You can't say, my pastor makes me believe this. My priest makes me believe this. My parents made me believe this. Maybe your parents made you, to a certain extent, practice, but can your parents make you believe something? No, they can't. You have the free will to ask those questions. And then it becomes your responsibility for what you live the rest of your life. So I'm going to ask you, do you believe what you believe? How's that for a redundancy? Do you believe in what you believe? What you've been told to believe? That's a good question. Ask yourself that. And if you're not sure, either find out why you should believe what you believe, or find out if there are other beliefs that you can incorporate, questions you can ask, blending you can do. You're going to know. So when a person's able to see beliefs as human constructions, we talked yesterday about man-made religion, human construct, then the entire structures, such as religions, governments, cultural taboos, economic philosophies, and so on, can be viewed with greater objectivity. You can look at these things and be open-minded about them. When you're not emotionally bound to a belief, you can more readily explore it and its consequences. You're then free to choose beliefs that work best for you and the world you want to create from them. You'll also feel more free to examine your beliefs whenever you wish. And if they're not meeting your expectations, explore why that is. Why is it so? Why do my beliefs not bolster my expectations of what those beliefs are supposed to do? And then what do I want to do about that? Now, let me throw in my caveat on this. I'm not trying to dissuade anybody from believing what they believe. If you sincerely believe something, it's your right and responsibility to act out of that belief system. I got to throw something in here because it's something that just came to my mind. I often wondered, and I remember talking to one of my old pastors about this when I was working with crossing over between youth and some men's ministries. And by men's ministries, I mean I used to, and some of you know this already, I used to work with small men's groups in my church with guys who had troubled marriages and things like that. And we used to talk about that stuff. We'd get together once a week and talk about how to be a better man, how to be a better dad, how to be a better husband, those things, rather than just walk away. That was part of our belief system. You don't walk away. You look at ways to improve and make it better. And so that's what I did. But I remember talking to my pastor, and he said to me, he says, do you know every Sunday when I speak? And by the way, he was a fantastic speaker. He was a gentleman and a gentleman. But he taught, I think, in a mode like I'm talking to you today. He talked about things that mattered. He wanted people to think. He wanted people to understand why they believe what they believe. He didn't just pour the liturgy out and toe the line. He talked to people. He taught from the heart. And so he would ask, as we were talking, he told me that he says, you wouldn't believe as I look out every Sunday morning and I'm speaking. He says, at all the faces I see out there in the congregation and all the things where I counsel people privately. And he says, Scotty, he says, you wouldn't believe the stuff that's going on in the personal lives of the people in our church. And, a lot of it really centered around adultery issues, unfaithfulness, broken families, stuff like that. Not to say that we were a church of wanton, sexual, depraved people, but isn't that the world? Bunch of people who were driven by our nature and so on. But let's push that aside. I don't want to get into that. That's why I dealt with it very lightly. But the point I was making was that he said, and I asked him about this, he says, it's amazing how people will be all inspired and geared up after a Sunday morning sermon to go back home and to live that life, to be encouraged to go on and live your Christianity, shine it, show it, let people see it in you. And yet, those same people by Monday morning usually completely forget everything that was done on Sunday. And that would bear the question, do they really believe what they say they believe if it is not part of who they are? If belief is not part of your operating system, you better check your beliefs and find out why. And I hate to say it, at that point, that vital narthex of what we're getting at is the end of the program tonight. We're out of time. So I'm going to go out for a 23-hour break as usual. I'm going to see you back here tomorrow night. Thanks for being here. Question what you believe. And find out, if I don't live what I say I believe, do I really believe it? And we'll take off from there tomorrow. Have a good night.